Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone's doing well. Welcome to this Meet the Alumni event brought to you by the Alumni and Development team at the University of Bradford. My name is Peter Locke, and I'm Senior Development Officer at the university, and I'm delighted to be introducing this Meet the Alumni webinar, which is titled Women in Leadership, Past, Present and Future. Now, the webinar will last for about an hour and will be split into two parts. The first 30 to 35 minutes will feature a conversation with our guest alumna, Shirley Cramer CBE, and then during the second half, we'll open the discussion and invite questions from the audience. Please submit your questions using the Q&A function, which you should be able to see on your screen. I'd now like to welcome Eva as chair of the session to introduce the topic and our speaker, Shirley Cramer CBE. Eva and Shirley, welcome and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Peter. Welcome, Shirley. Welcome to all our webinar attendees. I'm delighted to be hosting this webinar. Shirley needs no introductions, and an introduction in itself can take a whole hour of the webinar time that we have allotted. So I will give a brief introduction. We will be exploring some of the roles Shirley performed over the years in her career later on. So Shirley Cramer is the ex-CEO of Royal Society of Public Health. She also held and is holding several roles in public and voluntary sector, including being a trustee of Alzheimer Research UK, being on the board of trustees for Help the Heroes, and many other roles in the voluntary sector. Shirley also has been on several boards and advisory committees for the UK government in various years. And I am absolutely thrilled to have her here with us today. Thank you very much, Shirley. Welcome.
Well, I'm delighted to be here, Eva. Thank you so much for the invitation. It feels great to be back at Bradford after so many years.
It's wonderful to have you here. And it's wonderful that you mentioned Bradford, because I wanted to begin our conversation by taking you back to the time you were here as a student. So why did you choose Bradford? What informed your choice?
So in 1972-73, when I was 17, 18, I was on the American Field Service program, and I went from rural Cumbria to go and live in the suburbs of Chicago for a year. And it really opened my eyes to lots of different things, and particularly issues around social justice and all kinds of inequalities. And I was interested in politics, and I decided I really wanted to be a social worker. And when I looked at where the best course for social work was, it was undoubtedly, it was Bradford. And it had the great thing was it was not just BA Hons, but it also had the CQSW, the Certificate of Qualification in Social Work, which meant that you could, get a job quite easily. And I also liked the fact that it was 4 years and that you went on various placements. So it was theory and practice, which was great.
Well, I agree with you. So my own experience was also very an applied kind of learning. So here I completely agree and understand that the opportunity to apply what you learn in practice is really valuable. So what were your most favorite memories from the time you were studying? What comes to mind?
Oh, my goodness. So many happy memories, actually, and good memories from Bradford. And I would say that, the kind of things that I remember are things like seeing Queen at the Students' Union, eating curries at midnight, which I seem to do, obviously, quite a lot. We did card playing parties. I was a barmaid at the cricket club for a while. So many fun things. But from that, I gained lots and lots of friends, and friends from all the different courses not just my own applied social studies. And I would say that I have over 20 friends that I'm still really close to today, who I met 45 years ago. And on our course, we have fairly regular reunions, and it's been, wonderful to have such an excellent peer group and to be friends with them 45 years later. So I would say to anyone, it's magic being at university, and you can think that these will be your friends for life. And the stimulation around the course was we had really very, very good lecturers in all sorts of different subjects. And I remember I did a placement at Leeds Hospital on the mental health ward, but it was specializing in anorexia. And I so remember clearly what I learned there and that experience.
And would you say that the friends that you've developed formed part of your professional network as well?
Yes. I worked, as you know, for some time in the United States, but while I've been in England, certainly in the last sort of 10, 15 years, absolutely. And we will meet and discuss issues, and it'd be around public policy, or it'd be around various personalities in government, or civil servants we know, and contacts we have, and, a whole host of things which are useful to each other, that we can share experiences. And I have to say, too, that in 45 years later, a lot of my peer group are still working either as a social worker or in related fields, so have remained, in their professional field all these years later, which I think is a testament to the course we did.
Fabulous. So building on what you just said, could you very briefly talk us through your career and the various things you did since you have graduated? Also, I was planning to mention that you indeed worked for a significant proportion of time in the US and then also the UK. So it would be interesting to hear your experiences from both of these places.
So when I graduated in 1978, I came down to London from Bradford with my colleagues from Bradford, and joined Ealing Borough Social Services in the Southall area office, which was, of course, really interesting because it was very diverse. And I was in the emergency duty team, which meant I seemed to spend a lot of time in court or running around, working under the Mental Health Act. And I worked in that for 3 or 4 years, then got married, and my husband got a job offer in the United States. And because I lived in Chicago as a foreign student, I was really keen to see more of the States, and we moved to New York. And I then got a place at Columbia University in New York, and I did my Master of Science in what was then called social administration, which is really the management of not-for-profit or public agencies. And it was a mixture of the School of Social Work, Law, and public policy issues. So it was really a great course, and I'd been set up well by my Bradford degree. When I came out of that course, I had finally got my green card, which meant that I could work legitimately in the US. And so I was offered a job at Lenox Hill Neighborhood House, which is a settlement house in New York. So think about Toynbee Hall, which most people have heard of in London. It was the same thing in New York. And it was really interesting because they wanted me to do project planning and fundraising. And initially I'd wanted to work in the public sector in New York, but not having at that time an American passport, that's how I moved into the voluntary sector. And because I had an English accent, I think everybody thought, oh, you'll be good at fundraising then, and various other things. So that was a really, really great experience. And I learned a lot from doing various roles there. But in 1980, we moved back to London. You will hear that I've been a trailing spouse a lot of my life, despite the career. And we came back to London, and I became head of fundraising at the Muscular Dystrophy Group because I had quite a lot of fundraising experience by then. And after my first child in '89, I then started a fundraising consultancy with another friend, a woman I'd met, and it was during the Thatcher years when she was, getting rid of a lot of infrastructure and funding, and people and organizations really needed to try and stand on their own feet, understand how to have a mixed portfolio of funding around that. So, but then in 1991, we moved back to New York again, and that was my first chief exec role. And that was CEO of the National Center for Learning Disabilities. I think because I had a degree from the US and I had by then my green card, it was really, people knew me. And so, I had this first role, which was absolutely fascinating because we opened a Washington office, and my work there coincided with the first Clinton administration. And so that we did a lot of government work there was to change public policy and to improve public policy for children with learning disabilities. And it was a very good time to be working on things like that because you had a very open administration. You had an administration that was keen to do more national public programs. So one of the interesting things we did was to work both with the Republicans and the Democrats to bring together all the evidence of what was happening, both in the research around learning disabilities, about the practice, about what was happening, what parents were concerned about and what needed to change. How did you get the evidence into practice quickly to the benefit of the families? And we also had quite a lot of journalists involved at the time to talk about it, and we had a summit in Washington. It was all really, really very interesting, and I learned a huge amount about how to influence government and thinking about the bipartisanship, as they would say there, of needing to engage both sides. And in the US, it's particularly important because when Bill Clinton or the Democrats lost the House of Representatives in his first term, and it went to the Republicans, because I had been to see Newt Gingrich, who was at the time the head of the Republicans, but who were out of government, but I'd seen him before they came to power to talk about our issues. And so the Republicans would talk to me once they were in power, which meant it was a valuable lesson to say, you never know what's going to happen. You need to have everybody on side, particularly if it's an issue, medical or educational, that is really going to, affect the population in general, i.e. something that you hope that all politicians would care about or decision makers would care about. And so I left in 1995 that role, and as we moved to Cleveland, Ohio, which was possibly a bigger shock to my system than moving from London to New York. But I had a really interesting role there because I took on a sort of leadership of a project from Washington. So I was living in Cleveland, but going to Washington every other week for a couple of days. And I worked from home, but I had a bit more time at that point. And that's when I got my first two non-executive roles. So I became a trustee of Rainbow Babies and Children's Hospital in Cleveland, a brilliant pediatric hospital. And I also was on the board of a special school in Cleveland too. So I began to, learn about what it means to be a trustee, to be on the other side of the coin, the governance, the importance of strategic direction, what the board's about. And in 1999, we moved back to the UK. And as I say, I'm trailing my spouse, who is in finance, all of this time, but luckily managing to keep up my, to keep my career. And then when we moved here, I did some consultancy, but then I became chief exec of Dyslexia Action, which was a large staff group, over 500 people, and regional hubs, and it was a big operational role as a chief exec. There was a lot of moving parts to manage, and I always thought, well, I never seemed to stay anywhere very long, 3 or 4 years, and the reason was clearly because I was moving about. But I was at Dyslexia Action for 11 years, so I knew I had staying power once I had the opportunity to. And during that time, that's when I joined the board of the Learning and Skills Council, which was at the time an £11 billion organisation, which was responsible for all sorts of education and learning in I suppose technical and apprenticeships and all those other kinds of things. So, and then from there I became I was interim chief exec at Alzheimer's Research UK for a year, 9 months really. I thoroughly enjoyed, and I wanted to find out more about this because my mother had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, and I subsequently, as you mentioned, Eva, I went on the board. And then my last full-time role was 2013 to 2020, when I was CEO of the Royal Society of Public Health, where I had I really enjoyed the role. And it was very interesting because a lot of the things that I'd learned as a social worker and my degree in Bradford really came to the fore, looking at things like the social determinants of health, the things that we had talked about around public policy as students was very clear in the public health sector. If you now look at the differential in health inequality across the UK, you can see that a lot of this is not down to, how many buns you ate, or literally, how many drinks you took, but actually was about housing, was about how you were educated and where you were educated, the family you grew up in, the opportunities you got, the parks you could ride your bike in, all the food you got to eat. So all of that infrastructure, that underlying things that we talked about so much at university, and those were the things that I was particularly interested in that role, and the emerging public health issues. And so during that time, again, I took on a number of government committees, vice chair of the Public Health System Group for England, chair of the People in UK Public Health Group, which was looking at workforce across the UK, and particularly with the devolved nations, trying to make it sure that people who were qualified in England could also go and work in Wales, Scotland or Northern Ireland. So I might stop there, Eva, because it sounded like a run through.
Well, my next question might be difficult to answer, considering this fantastic history of career, but can you name one biggest success that just is in your mind, comes to mind?
So I think the things that come to mind are about public policy change, because that's, being in the voluntary sector, that's what your impact, that's what you're measured on, if you like. And so I think the one in the USA would have been the National Summit on Learning Disabilities, which created a huge amount of awareness and knowledge, and a book and papers and change in government, and was one of the benchmarks. It was one of the kind of key holes for the No Child Left Behind Act. So that was a really exciting thing to have been part of, and to make sure that children with learning disabilities were a huge part of that. and got improved services on a federal mandate, if you like. And in the UK, I think probably the work that we did on campaigning around emerging public health issues, and for that we did the first report at RSPH on social media and young people's mental health in 2016, which was it was a small exploratory study. We were taking evidence that we got from the USA, and we were asking questions really from students and others and young people. How is social media affecting you? But the report and what we found out really had ramifications around the world. It was the first time anybody had done it. So I think looking at taking a different lens on some of the public health issues, we looked at gaming to gambling and the effect on young people. Is this a pipeline for that? So some of the reports we did then, I think very proud of, because I think they, became issues that people are now really concerned about and working on, and policies being developed.
I'm going to take us slightly into a different direction. We are talking during the university's Women's History Month. And as a female leader with over 25 years of leadership experience, I'm wondering, what do you think are the biggest challenges that female leaders face today? And are there any different to the challenges of, say, 10 years ago, for example?
That's such a good question, Eva. I mean, I pondered this quite a bit because I have two daughters, so it mattered to me that things would improve. And honestly, I think in some industries they really haven't, and in some areas they have. So the voluntary sector, I think, is quite a good sector in terms of women's leadership. You see a lot more women leaders. I think in some other areas, less so. I think there's challenges facing women's leaders is that often there's still some misogyny around, particularly I talk to friends in the corporate world. There's not a pipeline, there's no planning that goes into saying how do we make sure we have the next line of women leaders. And I know some women actually in the corporate world who are doing that and pushing that now. Often you don't get women putting themselves forward who should be. Nobody's sitting behind them going, you really could do this job, or you should really be applying to be on the senior leadership team or whatever. And I think we need much more mentoring. We need people to be encouraged to do that. I mean, what's really clear is that if you have a job description and a man looks at it and a woman looks at it, it is true that the woman will say, well, I've only got 80% of the characteristics listed, and the man will have 50% and you'll say, oh, that's fine, I'll apply anyway. And so there's something about gaining confidence. And I can say that I gained a bit of confidence by working in the US, I think, because there you're allowed to make mistakes, and it was just a bit more open on these things. And I think, for females, we don't have to be perfect. We don't have to have every single characteristic. Some CEOs, are better. Some leaders are better at some things than others. But you need to surround yourself with people better than you are with complementary skills. But I think there's a lot more needs to be done in organizations about planning for succession and planning, giving people the opportunities they need to develop. And I think we haven't done enough on that. And of course, I would say childcare. I think that's a massive for a lot of women who are doing well in their careers, and then suddenly the cost of childcare comes in, and by the second child they're thinking, well, I don't think it's worth going to work because all my money will be spent on childcare. If you are thinking that, by the way, I would say hang on in there if you can, because it will be important to you later. And you can do like I did and do, you mix and match as you go along, and I think there are ways to keep things going. But I hate to see women sort of drop out of the workplace, really. at that time, when I think they should be supported by their employers and by other people in order to do that. So the barriers are less than they were. The policies are there. What we've got to make sure is that they're enacted properly so that we're given those opportunities.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you also for talking about what organizations can do to support the diversity agenda. And just linking to that, I also know that you held roles that you didn't mention, such as chairman for the Equality and Diversity External Advisory Group at the Department of Business Innovations and Skills. Sorry, I'm trying to get it all right. And thinking back to the experience of that role and thinking more broadly beyond support for female leaders, and also taking into account the intersectionality of diversity, how do you think we can and organizations can really promote diversity, and where are we with this, and what are the most pressing issues for organizations to take care of?
So again, a really good question, and it's again it's an issue I've thought about a lot over the years, and how it's changed. I've come to believe, as many people in my place have, that we need a lot more what I would call positive discrimination and quotas. And I know a lot of people don't like that, but I actually think it's come to the point that we've moved so slowly on certain things. Women on boards is a good example. We're better than we were. Women in senior leadership in the FTSE companies, and I know some women in those positions. And, you know, everybody thinks now that we need to say, you need this many women, you need this many people from, you know, BME, etc. etc. I think the policies which are often in place, and there are often good equality and diversity policies, sometimes sit outside the main organization, and that isn't how it should be. These need to be totally integrated across all operations, and that's how you get, I think, much better diversity. I think it's acknowledged now that diverse teams in every area of the organization are better teams. They make better decisions because you don't have groupthink. You know, you have different perspectives, and you need that. You need all sorts of voices. I think we need to do blind assessments about who we interview. So that would be, you don't see the name or where you're from or any of that. You just see the letters or the CV, because any ingrained issues that people may have, then, you know, hopefully that helps a lot. And I think leaders should be assessed on their performance around EDI, not just chief execs, but also team leaders and others. You know, it really needs to reverberate down the organization. And I think what I've said before, which is about a pipeline, making sure right at the beginning you're saying, okay, what's the opportunity for that person? Where can they go next? And how can they get as much experience, especially in a big organization? You've loads of opportunities to give people different experiences. Harder, of course, in smaller organizations, who, by the way, are sometimes really much better at this than other people. So I think we have a long way to go, but some organizations are really showing the way.
Thank you. And going back to the experiences of a female leader, what if you were to name top 3 tips for women who are looking to follow in your footsteps, what would they be?
Oh, I would say, and it really, find a mentor. That's a really important thing. Look for somebody in the organization. Don't be frightened to ask somebody. People will be flattered and happy to do it. Honestly, they will. Don't be afraid to be rejected. What I found is that often people are afraid, you know, think, oh, well, you know, I won't be chosen. And no, you might not be chosen the first time, but you will at some point. So fear of rejection shouldn't stop you. build up your confidence to do it. As I say, I think just being in the USA really helped me, because people were much more in that can do, and if you made a mistake it was okay, and it's putting yourself forward and also seizing opportunities. You know, I've heard people say very often, well, it wasn't the right time for me, and I've said it's never the right time. You know, there isn't a right time. Often the opportunity comes and you just have to just take that. And I think about how all your different experiences in different parts of your life can be tailored to your experiences. So I would also encourage people, even as students or as, you know, postdocs or in your first job, think about, could I be a trustee? Could I join, you know, could I be on the board of an organization? What is it I would need to know? You can go on training programs. So having that variety of experience, you could be a sport coach, so all of that will be helpful in thinking of yourself as a leader or somebody who wants to have, you know, grow in the organization, because you'll be growing by doing all those different things, volunteer activities. And it's so surprising in a way in job interviews how those things spring out, and those things you get questioned about, those kind of issues, and you probably won't think about it now, but it helps to define you as a person. And so I really would urge more women to come forward and think about yourself as a leader, because what we know about the female leaders is often they're more empathetic. I've learned that, you know, one of the things I learned at Bradford, I have to say this, was on my course, we learned about something called active listening. And that's really hearing what the other person says, really understanding what they're saying, watching their body language, feeding back what you've heard. And as a social worker, that's really important. That is such an important thing to do in almost any job you could ever do. And I've thought about that a lot in recent years, that I've used that the whole way through my career. And, you know, I think understanding, you know, what's happening in your organization, finding out, understanding people's where they are, you know, they just had a, you know, is there a birth in the family, you know, are they grieving about something, understanding staff, and just having that, I say the empathy about, you know, your teams will do better, and you care about them, and so they'll do better around that too.
Thank you. Well, I'm conscious of the time. I could continue this conversation for another 2-3 hours, but I'm conscious that we also need to leave time for the questions from the audience. So just one last question. If you could speak to yourself, the student at Bradford, what would you tell yourself, knowing what you know today? What kind of advice would you give yourself?
I would say not to worry so much about small stuff. I really would, you know, because you do, you know, it sort of goes along with you. But I would say actually all of those things turn out to be not that important. I would say to be more ambitious. Somehow, I mean, my career has been, I've really enjoyed my career, but it's been a little bit haphazard because of the way it went. And to say to everybody, you know, careers aren't linear, you know, they zigzag around, and, you know, capture all that in your CV and in your thinking. And I would have told myself those things. These are things I've learned after 45 years. And I would say, really capture all the things you're learning, you know, as you're going on, and don't be frightened of making your mistakes. I mean, I know that in the US, I really learned that it's okay to make a mistake, because you'll learn more from the mistake and that failure, because you'll say, well, what could I have done differently? And you almost learn more from the mistakes you made than you will from your successes in a way, because it enables you to think about doing things differently and to reflect on what you've done and how you did it and how you might do it better next time. And so, you know, without those failures, without those problems and issues, it's harder to grow as a person in the organization and the things you do.
Wonderful piece of advice. Thank you so much. And I think it applies to us all, particularly about not worrying about the small things. Well, thank you so much, Shirley. I am going to now turn to the questions from the audience. Okay. So, sorry, I'm navigating two screens. Okay, so I will filter a few questions through first. So, how did you expand your network during your time at university? So, what did you do to network and to develop your networks?
Well, actually, that's quite funny. Well, by having boyfriends in different departments, I could say that. So, by being in the union bar, so you always met lots of different people from different courses. So, I mean, those are very silly, but they're very unsocial. But actually, that was really how we met lots of different people. We joining in lots of activities, and I can't even remember what they were now, sort of joining various things. And you always would meet people who were on different courses and doing different things. So having an interest in a variety of things at the university, not just your specific area. And one of the things I would say around that is that it's really important in work to learn from other sectors too, not to just stay in your silo in a way, because you can really learn things from what other people are doing and in different sectors. And at university, I think it really was, there were a lot of social elements where you began to know groups from, there was a course at the time called Industrial Technology and Management, and there were lots of very social people on that. And I, still know, I'm still friends with people who were on that course who were doing lots of different things in industry, and lots of people went on to do very different things than me, but we we all stayed friends. I'd say networking in general, which it's a great question, because networking within Bradford, but also when you're working, is really, I think, important. So one thing I really remember is when I first came back to the UK in 1986, and I was doing a fundraising role, some of us set up this group called Women in Fundraising Development. And it was really a chance to meet other women who were in different charities and universities and hospitals, blah, 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 and, the arts, who were fundraisers. And that grew from just, a handful of us to over 100, and we would meet regularly and discuss various issues, and sometimes have speakers. And so sometimes just that networking was really valuable, because lots of people got moved jobs through that. So sometimes joining networks of professionals, I can think of women in business. I was invited to join that, and because they wanted different kinds of businesses, and that was very useful, because I met a lot of leaders in different sectors who I would not have met otherwise. So I would encourage, if you're going into your first job, to look for those kind of networks. My daughter works in finance, and she's in a Women in Finance group, and they have social events, but they also have speakers and things. So those are really important areas.
Thank you very much. Another great question from somebody who graduated with an MSc in cybersecurity, Nazreen, and is based currently in Toronto. And the question is, what advice would you give to get promoted in a male-dominated field into a leadership role?
In a male-dominated field, Okay, gosh. And I've been honestly in very mixed fields. I can tell you what I have a friend who is actually a professor at LBS, and she was a consultant, and she used to watch all these men getting promoted above her. And so when they'd come back from a project, there'd be a mixed project, and she would listen to the men feedback about the project and giving themselves the starring roles in the project, what they'd achieved. So she did that, and she came back and she gave herself a starring role in the feedback session, and she got promoted quite quickly. So I would say don't be shy about coming forward, highlight what you've done. Don't let the males in that environment take all of the energy from the room, because often the other thing is you'll say something and they'll take what you said and say it another way round, so that they've taken your idea. So sometimes it's about really making sure that whoever your line manager is knows exactly what you've done and how you contributed to the team, because I think for some reason most of us who are women don't push ourselves enough, and you have to make yourself do that and write it down and think about it, how you present yourself on that. And I know that can be hard, but I think, and by the way, congratulations on being in cybersecurity. That sounds an amazing role, an amazing job.
Thank you, Shirley. Another question from Holly. What are some of the main things you have learned as a leader?
So what I've learned is a leader is, if you're leading an organization, try and create the kind of culture that you would want to be in if you were a member of staff. So I was always really aware of that. And I had an open door policy. So I liked it that people could just come in and have a chat with me if they wanted to. So that I was open to chatting to everybody in the organization, which does actually mean that you spend a lot of time with them during the day, but was really important in the organizations that I've led. As I said, I think knowing your staff, I would say giving your staff autonomy. So what I learned probably too late in a way for my earlier roles was that by giving a staff team autonomy around a project, that you got a better project in the end. Because, for example, we would allow more junior staff to author reports with the senior. So you were putting more junior staff into the limelight a lot, letting them shine. Always celebrate success. I think as a leader, we just, often don't do that enough. And I think, it's very good in performance management to give people real world feedback in good time. But, if that team has been successful at doing something, make sure you take the time to do that. I think you need to, as a leader, care about governance, because that is a huge issue. It seems to be more and more, and I think we can see from the things that have happened in our own government recently, that having good governance in your organization, I can certainly speak for the voluntary sector, is really important. A good board, understanding how governance work and how your organization works, and thinking about strategic issues wherever you are in the organization. I think it's thinking about strategy and what you would do in both an internal context and external, because things change quite quickly sometimes and you have to be quite flexible. That's really a great skill to have. And I would say creating collaborations really been important, certainly in the roles that I've had, to create good collaborations internally but externally. And don't always have the usual people in that group. Often you can have a lot of different, as I said, different sectors, and certainly getting different groups aligned behind a particular campaign or something that you're thinking about is absolutely vital. And then the knowledge that you get from those sectors can feed back into your own leadership or your own what you're doing in your organization. And it can be really, really helpful. You learn different tactics about how to do something by doing that. And I'd say on leadership, really be true to who you are, because people know who you are. You're very visible and obvious. And so I think that authenticity is really important, because people can tell if you're not that kind of leader. And always fess up to your mistakes. I'm immensely shocked at how many people can't do that. And I just think if you made a mistake, and we all do, and often, you just have to hold up your hands and say, whoa, that was really a mistake. I'm so sorry. This is what we've learned from the mistake. And you heard it with somebody like Jacinda Ardern, who was always very clear to say when she'd made a mistake. And, I think leaders need to do that. And you see that very few of them do.
Thank you very much. We have two questions that are tapping on your international expertise. So I will ask both of them because they're related. So the first question is from Winston, and it talks about the perspective of an international student. What kind of leadership style would suit their region? So if they go back. And then the other question is about any tips and advice for increasing a chance of getting a role in an international organization.
Ooh, gosh, those are really good questions. And I really love the international bit, actually. I really enjoyed my time working in the States and having both those experiences. And I think really understanding where you are, understanding the context that you're in is vitally important. And my older daughter has just come back from Nigeria working there. And I mean, you can't work there without really understanding what's happening there and talking to people about what do they think. Sometimes we make assumptions about things or assertions about things that are just not true. So assumptions. So I would always, in that, a leadership style, if I was moving somewhere else, find out the external context, understand that. And that's, the politics, the geography, all of that stuff, but in your particular sector. But also talk to people, loads of people in the organizations, about what they care about, what they think should be happening, what they're happy about, what they're not happy about. You just learn so much from talking to people generally about their views and really listening to them, and then beginning to, then you can adapt your leadership style and adapt and think about different things that you might need to do. But it's surprising how many of the basic tenets, I think, are international, about being authentic and caring about people, and also having a good strategy, being able to be flexible in that strategy, and being clear about how you're going to operationalize your strategy. But it may need to be tailored to different circumstances and different places you are. But I would say to anybody, if you get that opportunity to work abroad, and I think obviously languages help, but that doesn't matter for obviously the USA, Canada, Australia, or New Zealand. So languages can help you. But I think being willing to go and work in difficult places sometimes, that and being open to a new experience, and that's a really good thing to do. And so looking for those organizations that are looking for people, and they may not be in the precise place you want, but having a go and seeing how that works for you, because that always is useful to have that experience at the end of the day, because you're bringing more to the party afterwards when you've been through those new experiences.
Thank you. Okay, mindful of the time, last question from Philip. Fundraising philanthropy appears to be a sector where more women are promoted to senior leadership positions. Why do you think this is, and how can other sectors learn from this? Wonderful question.
That is really a good question, and I think that's right. So what I think about this is that it's possible, and from what I've seen is that women are good listeners. You have to be a good listener to be a good fundraiser. You have to have a lot of personal skill. If you're in big gift fundraising, for example, you need to understand people, be interested in people. If you're trying to raise funds, either understanding the issue, you need to be able to sell it well, so you really need to care about it, and you need to understand the person that you would be getting the money from. You're looking at foundations and trusts, you need to be very specific, very clear, very understanding the business case. I think, you need to be very tactical, very strategic if you're doing direct marketing. So there are loads, I think, of those skills that women have. And actually hardworking, because in fundraising is a really hardworking profession in my experience of seeing people do that. And so I think the personal skills is probably, having those personal skills and being personable, and, could that be applied to other sectors? Yeah, possibly. I mean, you could be the person that organizes something special at your office. You could be the person who gets noticed by, deciding you have a guest speaker in at your staff meeting. You can think of all these different things that can make you special and make you the person that just showed a bit of innovation and creativity in how you do things.
Thank you. Thank you, Shirley. I am sorry, I said the last question, but one more came in and I'm mindful we have 4 more minutes, so I'll ask this. The question from Adina: throughout your career, particularly when you were a young professional, have you had a direct mentor? Do you think having a mentor would have an impact on someone's career journey? And I know you touched upon it already.
I do think it would be helpful. I mean, I would say that I had at different points. So in the USA, there was a woman who was my line manager, who who was a terrific mentor, particularly at that point for fundraising. She was extraordinary. And she was really great in terms of sharing her knowledge, but also introducing you to people. She was the ultimate networker. She showed me by modeling, and think modeling is very important. How you behave, it's a bit like being a parent, isn't it? How you behave, your children will see how you behave. But so how you behave, you can say, oh, I think that person's great, and I love the way she behaves, and I like her style. So, I would like to model myself partly on that person, and that might be the person to go and ask. So I can think of people who've been quite influential, and I've done quite a bit of mentoring for new chief execs over recent years, and that's been so interesting because there are no new questions in some ways. You've usually gone through a personnel issue or all sorts of crises you can help with or and support and put it into perspective, because sometimes in these things something blows up and you can get it out of perspective, and it's helpful with a mentor to do that. So I really would encourage people to look and say, who do I think is a good role model, and go and say, would you mind having coffee with me and talking to me about what I might do? I encourage both my daughters to do that.
Thank you very much. I believe that we are out of time, and I just wanted to say thank you once again for sharing your expertise, for coming back to Bradford, and for telling us your career story. It was really wonderful to listen to your experiences, and thank you very much for your generosity in sharing them.
Well, thanks for the opportunity. It's been terrific to be back in Bradford, where I started, and lovely, you know, to get to be able to reflect about some of the things that Bradford has done for me. So it's a great university, and I hope all the students are really having as good a time as I did. I should say that, and you know, I'm happy to, you know, if anybody wants to individually ask me a question, happy to answer anything. So thanks for the opportunity, and to all of you who joined the webinar today. Really kind of you to join us.
Thank you. And we had an amazing turnout. So thank you everyone for being here. Peter, is this the time when I hand over back to you?
Yes, thank you very much, Eva. Wow, what an incredible webinar. So interesting. Thank you so much, Shirley, for giving us your time. I hope you can see all the comments in the chat which are saying thank you and how much they appreciate it. So thank you. And thank you also to Eva for chairing and hosting the session. I said it's absolutely fantastic and so interesting. And I can see by all the comments everyone enjoyed it as much as I did. I just wanted to do a quick note just to say for our next Meet the Alumni webinar, it's going to be on the 26th of April, and we will have alumnus Chris Rhodes joining us. But on behalf of the university and the alumni and development team, thank you all so much for joining us. I hope everyone has a great rest of their day and take care. Thank you very much. Goodbye.